presentation tonight. We have Mark Seaman from the Stanley Center, who is going to be presenting about the update of the new Stanley Center's location and the collaboration with artists Nancy Judd and Deanna Dartt, who will be presenting after Mark does. So without further ado, we're a little bit behind schedule, so go ahead.
Thanks, Katie.
Yeah.
In addition to serving as Vice President and Director of Communications at the Stanley Center, I also have the high privilege of serving on the Board of Trustees for the Art Center. I think this is an incredibly special institution. It's one of the first places that I visited in Muscatine when I moved here 4 years ago, and it continues to just inspire me and be one of my happy places. So about 3-4 years ago, we went through an intentional process at the Stanley Center to ask ourselves, we've been in Muscatine for nearly 65 years, since 1956. And is this what we want to make our forever home? Is this where we're always going to be located? Is this where we're always going to be headquartered? We talked to our governance, we talked to members of the Stanley family and beyond, and the answer was a resounding yes, absolutely. The Stanleys valued Muscatine tremendously, gave back to it tremendously, as we all came through the Stanley wing of the Art Center and cared very much about this very special place. And so we said to ourselves, we know we want to stay in Muscatine, maybe it's time to build a forever home here. And we launched a process to look for the right plot of land, the right location, the right architectural partners. And the thing that has always driven the Stanley Center, and I think the Stanley family, is our core values. And so when we looked for an architectural partner, we came across Newman Monson. And when they came and did their presentation to us, they didn't talk about their grand plans for what would be possible. They talked about their values and wanted to make sure that we were a good fit for them as well. And that just struck a chord, and that made it instantly apparent that that's who we were going to work with. So we set about on a process driven by our values to find a location in Muscatine that was going to make the best home we could. We looked at dozens of places all over the city right at the start of the pandemic, some just outside of the city too. And when we came across the former Musser Library at 304 Iowa Avenue, it was just immediately clear that that's what we would want to make our home. And so Newman Monson launched a process driven by our values yet again, to put a ton of intention into what we were trying to create, what we were trying to build. And they came to us with an idea called the Living Building Challenge, something we had never heard of before. And when they explained the Living Building Challenge to us, it struck a chord yet again, just like that connection with Newman Monson. The Living Building Challenge is going to be explained quite a bit in this video, and so you'll hear more about it. But it is one of the most ambitious set of goals for achieving ecological sustainability and environmental friendliness in buildings today. It goes far beyond. Not only does it ask you, what can we do less bad of, but what can we actually do good for the environment in terms of buildings. Buildings contribute to 40% of carbon emissions on the planet. And the Stanley Center believes very strongly in climate change. It's one of our issue areas. We dedicate a ton of resources to it. And so the building, we hope, is going to be part of that change process that we'd like to see in the world. And my boss and friend Keith Porter just walked into the room, and you'll see, so I'm glad that my portion is just about finished.
Right on.
But you'll see a little bit of Keith in the video as well.
Oh,
I'm
no,
going to be happy to take questions afterwards, and but before that, I'll introduce Nancy and Deanna. So please enjoy the video. And you'll see some other friendly and familiar faces in here as well.
Great to see you guys. Thanks for being here today. We're going to talk about the environment and buildings. How do we protect the environment, guys?
When you're recycling stuff, you make sure it goes in the right bin.
Picking up stuff from the ocean, like water bottles and other stuff. What are some ideas of how you would make a building better for the environment?
I'll put grass on the floor because it will be good for the environment. Plus, you don't have to build a floor.
I would make it like a garden with like fruits and vegetables.
Very cool. I like that idea.
You know, we do a lot of local programming aimed at kids. One of the things we want them to do is to think differently about the world. And so I really feel that the building itself can serve that educational purpose that we've tried to do for many, many years. And this will be a really important resource for us in continuing that global education work in our local community. This project, our new headquarters, is really being driven by the Living Building Challenge. That comes from the International Living Future Institute, a Seattle-based group that's trying to address the climate challenge that humanity faces today.
The mission of the International Living Future Institute is to create a future that is socially just, culturally rich, and ecologically restorative. A living future is really a vision that encompasses all sectors of society. The environmental issues that ILFI addresses are really covered in the categories of the Living Building Challenge. It's really important that all the buildings and spaces that we occupy on a day-to-day basis fight against climate change. When buildings are built to code, they're doing just basically the bare minimum for human health and safety and protecting the environment.
Buildings contribute to roughly 40% of the carbon emissions in the world, and there are many programs out there right now that try to lessen what we're taking from the world and our resources, but the Living Building Challenge is actually trying to even do better than that and give back.
The Living Building Challenge is the most advanced and holistic framework for sustainable design performance areas. It really sets the highest bar for what good looks like in architecture. The goal of having buildings like this is to have a net positive effect on the environment and for the people that occupy those spaces.
What appealed to us about the Living Building Challenge was the holistic aspect of it. It's not just a checkbox of items that you can go through and say, okay, we've met the requirements. It goes through a very thorough vetting process.
We have a big opportunity to have a positive impact on climate future, sustainable buildings.
The Living Building Challenge sounded very exciting, and if we can pull this off, and I firmly believe that we can, it's going to be monumental.
There are 7 pillars in the Living Building Challenge. They are really high design aspirations and performance aspirations for what buildings should do. We have place, water, energy, materials, health and happiness, beauty, and equity. All of this sounds like a crazy idea. Luckily, we've had some great leadership in this space to show us it's not a crazy idea. It's a very practical idea, and it's what good looks like going into the future.
I don't think I had ever heard the term biophilia before we started this process, but the idea of not only being good to nature, but this idea of bringing nature into the building. Those are the kind of things that we got out of this commitment to the Living Building Challenge.
This idea of connecting everybody to nature was very important. So we used a lot of natural materials to create that sense of warmth. The doors, there's elements of plantings within those spaces too.
We were challenged by the Living Building Challenge to really find out more about the real history of this. We are not the original inhabitants of this land. Colonialism isn't, some historic thing. It is an ongoing process that has real impact on real people.
I spend hours and hours talking about Native American history and injustice and genocide, and some people can't hear me, but a work of art can do that.
I was really excited when the Stanley Center approached me and said, we were wondering if you would be interested in creating a sculpture for our entryway. I started talking to Deanna about the project, and we are hoping to make a tree out of reclaimed materials from the library. Written on the leaves will be a conversation between Native folks and settler folks. And we would begin to kind of explore what meaningful reparations could look like.
The leaves will provide a way for the public and the Native community to interact with one another, interact with this work of art. The visitor might even get ideas about what they themselves can do. That would be my goal, is that they're moved to action.
We want this building to be good for people because we believe that's important. What would you do for a building?
I would give the people free food. I would also have like a place where I could grow vegetables and we could give it out to the homeless people.
One of the things that we're going to have in this building, we're going to have a lettuce wall. It's going to be a wall where we grow lettuce.
We'll also have a courtyard where we will be able to grow things that will then be donated to our neighbors, the Muscatine Center for Social Action, MCSA, which is a local organization devoted to people who are suffering from homelessness.
And if we have extra lettuce, we can take it over to the food pantry next door so that other people can have that fresh produce too.
There used to be an old creek bed that flowed through the site, which is actually one of the challenges that we've been working around.
The water system that we're installing is one that will capture almost all of the rainwater that comes onto our site, treat it and turn it into potable water. And the water that we can't use, we have to dispose of it.
The water is collected at the cisterns, and then it's routed through the entry, and then the basin that it channels through is shaped as a river.
We want to symbolize that same flow of that creek out to the lowest point of the site where the water will be retained before it's saturated back into the earth.
I'm very excited about the solar panels that will be on the rooftop and the canopy that's going to bridge across over to MCSA. I love things that solve multiple problems or address multiple issues, and that canopy I think is a really amazing example of that, because not only is it extending the footprint of our rooftop so that we can have more solar generation to offset our energy use, but it also is providing shade and shelter to people.
The materials pedal is challenging for us. It's sometimes difficult to find products that don't include any of what's called the red list.
The red list has been really profound for architects and designers that are specifying these materials because it tells us which chemicals we should be watching out for and screening out of our specification process to make sure that we're not accidentally introducing really toxic chemicals into these spaces.
When you think about office furniture, environmentally, what's in your materiality that we know is not good? We continually are pushing ourselves, and the Stanley team's helping us to say, how do I get the red list items out? And then where's that line where I'm actually causing more good than bad?
In the materials pedal, we have to do as much local sourcing as possible.
Anytime that you can choose a material that's sourced locally, you're going to reduce the carbon footprint. Climate change is greatly impacted by waste and materials, and that's one of the challenges with this Living Building Challenge, is to source things as close to Muscatine as you possibly can.
I'm really glad that you and Monson put a high value on biophilia to reflect not just plants, but also sort of natural forms, natural surfaces, all of those kind of things that create comfort and warmth and a sense of security and a sense of beauty.
It's not just about the buildings, but it's also about the people and, the water systems and beauty itself too.
We are planning a beautiful tree that as you walk into the building, it draws your eye and invites you in.
There's so much that art can convey. A work that invokes maybe some compassion and also a historic message about genocide will just really kind of hook someone on an emotional level. I hope that the tree has that impact.
The Living Building Challenge is for sure a challenge. That's why it has that in its name. So there's no doubt about that, but it is absolutely worth it.
We are extremely privileged to have the resources to invest in this type of project, and I think that we're leveraging that privilege in a really powerful way to hopefully create change that extends not just beyond the walls of this building and this city, but also much further.
The building is such a learning tool for everybody, for us, for the occupants, for the community.
Renovating a building that had been used for learning and education for all those years is meaningful to us. I think it's really just a win-win for us and for the community.
When you take on the Living Building Challenge, you're helping others others following your footsteps and make it a little bit easier for that next project team that wants to take this on.
When you learn that much about something and it kind of hits your core and you see it implemented so much like you do with the Stanley Center and their mission, it can't help but change you. This feels like the confluence of so many different pieces of the Stanley Center's mission and goals, and seeing that in reality, I think will be really amazing.
So, do you want to come visit this building when we get done?
Yeah, do it.
Yes.
Hi.
Yes, Tom.
All right. So that's a little video that I hope explains a little bit more about the project. An interesting thing that I was reflecting on while we were sitting here is that we're inside of the home of Laura Musser McCollum. And it was Laura Musser's family's money that built the Laurel Building in downtown Muscatine, which is where the offices are that we currently occupy. Just up the street a little bit is where our new offices will be. And what does all of that land and territory have in common? It all forms part of the unceded core territory of the Kickapoo, Sauk, Meskwaki tribes. And with that in mind, and as the Living Building Challenge required us to do, we put a lot of effort and intention into what is this space? What is this plot of land? And why is that important? Why is its history important? So when we sought to do an art program in our new building, we first thought about climate change. We first thought about taking some of those reclaimed materials out of the building and creating a work of art out of it. We were lucky enough to have Nancy Judd in Muscatine a couple of years ago over the summer, who presented an exhibit which did exactly that, used reclaimed materials to make garments. And Nancy, you might want to talk a little bit more about that. But that was kind of the inspiration for us to say, hey Nancy, why don't you come over and take a look at the art center, or at the library, and see what might be there that you could create a sculpture out of. And she said, oh, okay, I'll give it some thought. And I said, no, come on, Nancy. And we went over the next morning, and she looked around, and she said, you know, Mark, I was really hesitant, but I actually last night had this idea. And she holds up this piece of paper, and there's this beautiful drawing of a tree on it. And you know, with all of that thought and intention, we also looked at what trees meant, what they come to symbolize, and I hope that they're going to talk a little bit about that now. So without further ado, and from enough from me, Nancy Judd and Deanna Dartt, the artists who are working on our tree sculpture.
Thank you, first of all, so much to the Muscatine Art Center for hosting my exhibit here, first of all, last year, and for introducing me to Keith and to Mark and to Krista. Came over to see the exhibit, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I just really want to, like, from my heart, say thank you so much to both organizations. So, here we are. I'm starting off here.
You are.
Okay, great. So here, this looks a little bit different than what you saw in the video, and that's because we realized that the space, like when I walked into this space the first time, I like just saw those huge vaulted ceilings, and so like my artist brain just like took up the whole space of that whole area, and then kind of the reality of the space that we were going to be working in made us realize that we needed a different configuration of the tree. It wasn't going to work to be a big tree, a full-grown tree. So this is a young tree that we're working with. And I've foliated half of it because we're going to talk about the structure of it beforehand. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I'm going to just talk a little bit about myself, and Deanna's going to talk a little bit about herself, and then we're going to talk about us together, and then we're going to talk about the project. So for those of you that didn't see my exhibit, I guess maybe just a little hands up of who was able to see it when it was here. Okay, so about half the room or so. For those of you that didn't, I, for the last 2 decades or more, have been creating sculptures that, oh, listen to that. Isn't that nice? What time is it? There we go, okay.
6
I've been creating sculptures that appear to be fashion, couture, clothing, but I use trash, and I use my work to talk about our planet and how we live on this planet, what's happening to our planet, ways that we can live lighter on the planet. And I exhibit my work in high traffic places such as airports. This is the Atlanta airport. This is my second exhibit there. And also museums. And so my first exhibit was turned into a traveling exhibit that traveled around to museums around the United States. And then the second one, this one, Alterations, also did. And its first stop after the Atlanta airport was here in Muscatine. So I am actually kind of in a transition as an artist. This body of work, this 2 decades worth of work is a chapter that's closing for me, and I'm moving into a different type of work, which is really what Deanna and I are doing here at the Stanley Center. So I feel it's such a gift to be able to work on this project that we'll tell you more about. So that's me. Did I forget something?
I don't remember if, yeah, I guess it is.
Oh, it's you.
All right.
She winked at me. I said,
I rely so heavily on my PowerPoints. I heard a woman say the other day, I have the power and I make the points. I don't need a PowerPoint. And I'm like, I do. I like PowerPoints because they sort of create the outline. Haku Lia Klecken Lina Hilken Ta Shumawish, Tipa Shumawish. So I just basically said hello, relatives. My name is Deanna Dartt, and Shumawish, Tipa Shumawish is our way of saying hello and how are you, but it literally means how are we in relationship to one another. And so we greet one another that way, as a reminder that we're in relationship together. We're all in relationship together, and we all count on one another, and there's an interdependence that we need to be mindful of all the time. Anyway, so thank you first of all to both the Stanley Center and the Muscatine Art Center for allowing us to do this amazing project. Just a tiny bit about me. So I just spoke to you in Smuwich, which is my traditional language. My mom's people come from the Montecito area of California, Santa Barbara area. My dad's people are from the Dartt River in Devon, England. But I identify very closely with my Chumash community and my ancestry and my history, and my work for the last several decades has really exemplified my commitment to that community and to Native people as a whole. So my PhD is in anthropology, and I studied the way that public sites represent Native people and how those representations, how those narratives shape how people relate to us, right? And so basically, my dissertation research looked at how when there's an extinction narrative or a portrayal of Native people only in the past, then people are not set up to actually be in allyship or be in relationship with us, right? Because they think we're gone. And so they don't really know how it's abstract to them when they meet a Native person, and when they think about how do I recognize my privilege as a settler? How do I restore balance to this place? The kinds of things that this tree represents, and that all of my work represents. And so I've had a couple of curatorial appointments at major art institutions, and then I branched off on my own about 4 years ago to do consulting work. And what has occurred as a result of that work is that I kept interfacing with folks who really needed tools for activating their allyship and leveraging their privilege, and wanted to know how to even engage with Native people. There's so many organizations that want to work with Native people, want to acknowledge this history, the history of genocide of this continent, and don't really know how, or how to engage Native people to retell that history in meaningful, accurate ways. And so I set out to be the person that kind of bridged the Native communities and the organizations that want to serve them and tell those stories. And so it began with museums, but now I'm working with other arts organizations, with environmental organizations, municipalities, even big corporations like Nike. There is a bandwagon, and even major corporations are on it. They recognize that Native people haven't had a seat at the table for a really long time, and so I just happen to be doing this work at a time when people really are interested and engaged. So I started developing this training, what we call Decolonization 101. And I was actually doing a residency, a writing fellowship in Santa Fe. Nancy and I had met in Portland and had forged a friendship. And then I went to Santa Fe for a year, and we were on the phone one night just doing what we do, just talking about our personal lives and so trying to support one another. And I told her that I was in the process. I don't remember if you said it first, but Nancy decided to develop an arts integration training, and I was in the middle of trying to develop a Decolonization 101 training. And we recognized how those two things might be like chocolate and peanut butter. I don't know if anybody in this audience is old enough to remember the colliding of those two things that didn't think, no one thought that they could go together, but they collide at the bottom of a staircase, and the chocolate ends up in the peanut butter, or the peanut butter ends up in the chocolate, depending on who you talk to. And it's this yummy, delicious thing, right? And so we did that. We integrated the work that Nancy does as a teaching artist and my work as a lecturer on Native American genocide, and we married those two things and helped the participant engage parts of themselves other than just their minds, right? When they do an art project or they do a movement exercise that's being led by Nancy, they actually get some of this content in their bones. And so the 101 training has these components. It usually has a local Native American component. We address stereotypes and misconceptions that are really commonly held among most Americans. We look at the way that settler privilege shows up and how it's different from white privilege. There are a bunch of things that folks don't even think about when they think about privilege in terms of race. And then how to activate your allyship, how to be in partnership with Native communities and to own the history of this continent and really start partnering with Native people. And the training has all of these arts integration exercises built in, and then we give really practical solutions to how you can apply these concepts in your work life and in your home life. For a lot of people, we provide information that is hard. Especially the local Native history for a lot of people. We did a training down in San Diego at the museum. It was then called the Museum of Man, and now it's called the Museum of Us. And I talked about how notice all of the Spanish place names in San Diego, and how you actually don't see any Kumeyaay place names in this place. Why are there no Kumeyaay people here? They all live in the desert. Why would the Kumeyaay move away from the beach? And people who live there in Coronado Island, are right in the heart of San Diego. Most of them have never asked themselves, where did the Indians go? Well, they were actually removed and pushed into the rocks. There's a book even called that, Pushed in the Rocks. And we had folks come back the next day and say, it's really uncomfortable for me to walk or drive through my town now, and recognize that. So there are things that come up, trauma, grief, and so we talk about ways to mediate some of that, and how being in action, how being in the solution, taking action, can actually help to alleviate some of that grief and some of that guilt. And so Nancy and I started doing this work together, and then I don't remember how this. You want to talk about the suit?
Yeah.
About
So
the suit for a minute.
this suit was in the exhibit that was here at the Art Center, and it's called The Suit of Invisible Settler Privilege. And this came out of our trainings, because one of the things we do in our trainings is we talk about what are some of the privileges that we have as settlers. So, for example, I'm not worried that when I die, my language might die with me. Like that's one of those privileges we don't ever even think about, right? So there's about 20 or so of them that we read in the trainings, and so we came up with the idea of collaborating on a project together for my exhibit that would really get at the heart of this. So this is a pinstripe suit that was fashioned after one that my grandfather would have worn at the height of his career as the treasurer of Standard Oil in California. Can't get more extravagant than that. And so we would ask, this is made of a plastic Tyvek, and before it was all sewn together, I had dyed all the pieces black, and then I had taken silver pen and I had made lines on it, and then I took the pattern pieces to our workshops, and when we would read the settler privileges, we'd ask people to choose one or two that hit them in the heart and to write them down onto the suit on the pattern pieces, and then they got sewn together. And so this was our first collaboration together. And so the next thing, is there anything more you want to say about this before I move on?
No, I would just add a couple things. So he's standing on a pile of garbage, right? And so not only does he represent the extractive industry, but also the sort of waste that's left behind afterward. His red tie represents the sort of blood of the choking of the lifeblood. I mean, we had these these artistic conversations for months prior. That so every bit of him actually represents some symbolism. But what's also very interesting is that Nancy's grandfather's extractive work actually happened in the very same place where my people were dispossessed and marginalized, and so we literally represent the two sides of this, the settler and the a marginalized indigenous person in this body of work. So we're able to, and we bring that that history to the trainings as well, to the trainings, and then also to these works of art now that we're doing. It's another way that the peanut butter and chocolate gets smashed together.
And I might add, in the trainings where we weren't able to fill all of the pattern pieces, and so I filled them up as sort of a personal diary, really exploring, like, here I am, having the privilege of sitting in a studio in my home that I own on Chinook Nation with the time and the space to be an artist, and I don't have to work 40 hours a week because of the safety net that my grandfather left. So I did a lot of stream of conscious writing that really explored my privilege in this piece, and that's part of it. And the last thing I'll say is that this is sort of a time-based art piece in that over time the ink will start to fade, and so it starts out black and then it will start to fade to brown, and so all of the privileges will start to be seen, and that's really the goal of our work, is that our privileges are seen over time, that we start to see them. So like I mentioned, this is a picture of the show upstairs, and So the day that that Keith and Mark and Krista came to see it, I had just finished setting it up, like maybe 10 minutes before or something. And I had just come from Atlanta, taken it down, driven it here, and Virginia's sitting over here in the back, and bless her heart, Virginia and Pat helped me to, take it out and put it up, and meanwhile we were making boxes for it because it was going to become a show that was going to go on the road. So thank you, Virginia. And anyway, all that to say, I was like beyond exhausted, and I pulled myself together to give them a tour of the show. And then afterwards they asked me, they're like, would you have any interest in this? And I'm so embarrassed to say that I was so exhausted, I couldn't even think straight. And I was like, well, maybe you want to find a local artist who welds, I don't know if I'm the person for you. And they were like, no, just come down and take a look. I was like, okay. So I don't know where my head was. I'm glad I didn't listen to me and I listened to you instead. And so, as Mark said, the morning I woke up, this is what happens for me as an artist, is I have creative downloads, and it's just like, whew, there's the idea. It wasn't there 2 minutes ago, and here it is. And so I had the idea for the tree. At that point, I had the idea for the structure of the tree. I knew there'd be a tree, I knew there'd be leaves, I knew there'd be something written on the leaves, but I hadn't quite gotten further with it yet. And this was the old library that we went to, and I was like, yeah, okay, this is where I had the vision of the huge tree that was going to take up the whole space. I went from, I can't do that, to taking up the whole space. And then I actually started talking to Deanna about the project, more asking for her advice as an art curator, and I was putting together the proposal, and so I just had some questions, and then she was like, hey, wait a minute. And so we then had our chocolate and peanut butter moment and started like, yeah, and this, and so it was so obvious. Oh, of course, this tree needs to be about the land and the people of the land. And so that's when she came on board as my co-artist. And so, are we doing the overview right now of the project?
I think so. Let's look at.
Okay, what's the next slide? Okay. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit physically. So we're using the railing. Well, no, I'm going to go more into depth about that. So as I've mentioned, there's the railings from the library, and then they're going to have leaves on them, and the leaves are really a kind of this conversation. Am I getting ahead of myself? Maybe you're supposed to go. I think you're supposed to come up and talk about it now. That's why I'm lost.
Okay.
Come on.
And what Nancy didn't say, I don't know if we have a slide talking about this, but the leaves, as you probably saw if you were downstairs with us, are come from the decommissioned books from the library also, and so they have. You can see in the example on there, there's writing on them, and they're painted, and Nancy will talk a little bit more about the physicality. But so the sort of morphing of this idea just from a sculpture that was a tree to the Tree of Acknowledgement happened in these conversations that we had when I was really only going to be providing some editorial and curatorial expertise. I was like, wait, this is the Stanley Center for Peace and Justice, and whose land are they on, Nance? And she's like, oh, I don't know. And I was like, well, we should probably, let's look into that. What if the tree actually it was an acknowledgement of that history of the people of that land? And what if it could be something that not only represented the history of the people of that land, but the fact that they are in dialogue with the people who have settled that land? And what if, and I don't know, it didn't happen in those first two conversations, but when we started talking about what type of tree, and we landed on the American elm because it's so threatened, right? Because of an introduced disease, there aren't American elms like there once were, and that is also the experience of American Indians, right? And so again, you know, just like the suit, the tree is just full of all this symbolism for us, all these conceptual ideas. Our big goal, and the role that I intended to play was trying to be that bridge to the Native community here, which is really hard to do in the middle of COVID, right? In the middle of, you know, a pandemic when all people, not only tribes, are kind of hunkered down and trying to take care of their own stuff. But just being remote is difficult. I don't know any Meskwaki folks, and so I started doing some outreach, and where we are today is, you know, really relying upon the Stanley Center's relationships, budding new relationships, somewhat like our young tree, all right, but you know, with the intention that it's going to grow into this very robust, healthy, you know, being. What other pieces am I? Is that?
I think the next slide kind of gets into where we're going next.
Yeah. So, the colonization, this artwork as a healing tool, recognizing that the colonization of the people of land and the land are closely linked, that the Tree of Acknowledgement will explore how this violence has led to the environmental and social crises humanity now faces, right? And recognizing that we are all in need of the restoration of balance. And my work that I call applied decolonization is really about restoring the primacy of indigenous people to the land to help guide us into a healthier future. Because indigenous people of this place actually know how to live in balance in this place. And because those people have been forcibly removed from the land itself and the environment is out of balance. And so to restore balance, there's a lot of environmental organizations that are stepping forward and ready to heal the land, right? But not recognizing the genocide that occurred here to the people of the land, the stewards of the land, the original stewards, the people who were here for thousands of years, maintaining this place, taking care of this place. That we can't ignore that piece, right? And just try to heal the land. Well, what about the people of the land? So my theory of applied decolonization is that piece that component has to be recognized, and that healing has to occur between, settler folks and the people of the land in order to restore the land to its balance.
If I can just throw in there, it also is such a beautiful connection with the Stanley Center's work and the work of mass genocide and of climate change as well. As the project has developed, it has, it just kind of keeps filling up the space more and more beautifully, making beautiful connections.
You want to speak to the partners and?
Yeah, so, well, obviously the Stanley Center is the sponsor of the project. The Muscatine Art Center not only is sort of the birthplace of this project, but Katie in the back is spearheading all of the leaves and creating the leaves. I came up with the whole process, and then I sent her this huge, very heavy box with all of the materials that she would need, except for the books that came from the Muscatine Library. And bless her heart, she's been doing an amazing job of, I think she sort of became a leaf whisperer. She's really gotten into figuring out how to really make them work, because there's lots of steps. And so some of you today came and helped painted those leaves, and thank you, all of you. You got a lot of really good work done today. And we're going to continue to have more workshops for different parts, for the leaf painting, but also for some more parts. And then the Muscatine Community College, and Naomi's here today. Thank you, I'm so happy to see you. And his is a super important partner, and we're going to show some pictures about why, but basically they are housing the creation of the fabrication of the structure of the tree itself, the welding of the aluminum, and we'll talk more about that in a moment.
Unfortunately, it says on our PowerPoint the Muscatine Community Center, but we meant Muscatine Community College.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, that was me, I was typing too fast. Yeah, that's supposed to say college, not center. Good catch. And then, of course, the Meskwaki settlement, and those folks are a key player as well. So this project involves our community partners. It involves outreach to Native communities, not just the Meskwaki Nation, but also other Native communities in the area. We'll be doing a decolonization training with the Stanley Center, with the community college, and with folks from the Art Center as well. Krista brought me into some Spark classes this week. I came a little bit early, and we were talking about these issues with the kids, and that was very enlightening for both of us. I think we just drove in, and and then we'll be doing some crowdsourcing for the statements on the leaves, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, what those statements are going to be. So let's talk about the structure of the tree. So these are the railings, the picture on the left over here. Those are the railings that were in the old library for years. Probably many of you's hands have touched those many times. And I just included this photo because we didn't realize that they were solid. We thought they were hollow, but we were really surprised when one was handed to us. So these are going to be welded together by Heath Daggs is our lead welder, and he is a friend of Krista's. They went to high school together, and bless her heart, she found him for us. And he's working with Chris Kramer, who's the director of welding at the community college. And together they are doing a ton of problem solving and figuring that we would never even know where to begin to do. And so we're so lucky that those two are on board. And this is an experiment. These photos were taken today. We went over to the community college today. This is an experiment that they just did, I think this morning, where they were blow torching the aluminum and I don't know what all. Anyway, but it looks so much like bark. It was so amazing. It went just from smooth to this surface. So we were really excited to see that. Here is a prototype of the first branch, and Heath keeps saying it looks like a coat rack. So it will become organic. We're super excited because Heath keeps talking about he keeps returning to the trees and how the shapes of an elm tree, and he's really interested in getting that really close. So we couldn't have a better team on this job. Then we headed over to the site, to the new headquarters, and so the entrance will be right here, I believe, and then this is the window where the tree will be, right there. And this is from the inside. This is that same window. And so these little orange markers right here are approximately where the tree will live. And it will be attached to the cement. So it's not going to move around. Yeah, there's our little team. There's Mark and Heath and Dina and I. Some of the team, Chris isn't there, but yeah. So that's kind of the story of what's happening with the tree itself. And again, just could not do this without the community college. And we're also excited because we're going to have some students who will be working on it. And I think it's actually high school students who have already done like the first level of welding, and then they're going to come in the summer and hone their welding skills on this project. Okay, now you were going to talk about the leaves, right?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So so this is the place where this dialogue can occur, right? The conversation between Native people and non-Native people, right? And so. Well, the making of it is
I know, that's me.
I know,
sorry.
that's why you weren't
Okay.
going to sit back down. She was like,
I know. Oh, I forgot
you can talk about the physicality
okay,
of it. But I'll just finish saying that, So after Nancy's part, she's going to talk about the development of the leaves themselves, but each of them, we're going to have probably 3 colors. The darker, larger leaves are going to be statements by Native people, not only local Native people, but our crowdsourcing. We're going to, the first tier, like the leaves closest to the person standing next to the tree, will be the statements that we're able to gather from the Meskwaki and other tribes that are indigenous to this area. And then further out are going to be statements from Native people from throughout the country, right? And the prompts for those folks are going to be things like, what can people who are settlers to this place do to restore balance? What are some of the things that you would like to see your neighbors, your allies, how would you like to see them activating their privilege? So some of the things that I've been writing are, please know your local Native history. Please don't wear my culture as a costume. Things like that. And so we'll use the internet to crowdsource to get those statements, and then we'll transcribe them onto the larger, darker leaves. So the larger, darker leaves are the mature leaves, right? The ones that have been around for a little while. And then the other 2 will be smaller and lighter in color, and those will be statements about the ways that people want to activate their privilege. So maybe they might say, I pay rent to the Chinook Nation. I saw Nancy had written that, and that's something that she really does to the local Native tribe. Every month she pays rent to the people who are indigenous to Portland. So that it's literally a dialogue that your visitor will see that, these are the things we believe will restore balance, and then these are the things that I'm willing to do to activate my privilege.
And we want to share the statements that come from the indigenous folks with the settler folks. That's part of the process. Mm-hmm. So the physicality of making the leaves, as I mentioned, we're using the old books from the library. I had a special die made of an elm leaf, and there's a machine, and you crank it and you put the pages in, and then leaves come out. And then I was going to bring up the sample, I forgot. But we're weaving a wire into the leaf, and then it's getting painted, and then the statements will be gathered, and then because some of them are electronic, we're going to have people transcribe the statements onto the leaves, and then they'll be ready to put on the tree once the tree is in place at the headquarters. And so the wire is going to wrap around the metal twigs, and then we'll put a little bit of glue on there, and they should stay fine. I did some samples and left them around for about a year. I think that's around when we started talking about this, and they're very light, fast. So that's going to be kind of and then the last thing will be the foliating the tree. So if you all are interested in continuing your participation in this, there's